are some things that are at risk, and I will call those out. The work to bridge cost accounting with the wallet and the proof of stake contract is very much at risk. The team is on it. We've talked a lot about it this week in our stand-ups and had additional off-chain conversations happening, and some peer work, peer developer work happening, but that is likely to slip with the closure of the next sprint, and hoping for some clarity by the end of this week on making sure we do have some really good clarity on what those next steps are. It's one of those situations where we just keep running into things. So you find a solution to one thing, and then as you dive a little deeper, now you have a problem in something else. So I'm grateful for the team's continuing focus on that. It's not easy, and they're well focused on the task at hand. And of course, that then impacts the starting work on the multi-sig wallet. That absolutely will slip into next sprint. And these rolling bug fixes, which I'll talk a little bit about, there might be slip there as well, because they turn, investigating bugs, sometimes those bugs get bigger than when you imagined them. But that work is in progress. And we are intending today to update and relaunch the public testnet with RNode 9.5. I'll talk more about that in just a few minutes in terms of what's going into RNode 9.5, but you're welcome to take a peek at the release plan, and you can see very clearly what items are going to be in that release, and I'll be updating that release plan later today to call out in plain English what the highlights of this particular release are. I want to talk a little bit about our community test. We do plan to do a community test tomorrow. We will be using the updated testnet with RNode 9.5, and invite everyone to come and participate in that. 9.5 has some node features in it that impact node users that you should see and hopefully enjoy, as well as we'll be running the new RSpace and looking to see the increased ability to grow long chains. So if you're interested, please do come by tomorrow at 1400 UTC. Happy to have you there. We have been working as part of our dev retreat and as part of our planning and estimation, and as our forward thinking to think about mainnet launch. And so some bullet points here related to kind of where we are related to that. Currently, we estimate that the Mercury will be code complete in August. And I just want to call out that this does not include work that may result from the investigation of rolling bloat in the tuple space or any other bugs that we might encounter along the way. That is the current estimate based on conversations that I've had with the dev team as part of our retreat process and then over the course of this week. We are having conversations as a team to clarify how to provide a community-driven and decentralized mainnet launch. This is a priority, as we understand it, of the cooperative, and making sure that we have clarity on what those requirements and expectations are. We also have conversations in progress to clarify issues related to the issuance of REV, making sure that we understand what the expectations are for issuing REV based on ROC, especially as we have heard publicly the need to escrow Pythia-owned ROC, and it's unclear what exactly we might do with ROC related to the Barcelona scam. So having conversations to clarify that. We recognize the need to update communications to ROC holders related to the process, and that's kind of trickle out from all of these conversations. And working to ensure that the tooling that the dev team is putting in place can adequately support REV holders claiming and transferring their tokens after a mainnet launch. And so this is a big part of the talk that we've been having as a dev team over the past couple of weeks, and just wanted to make sure I was transparent with you all about those conversations that we're having. Finally, we have conversations in progress to finalize the criteria for releasing Mercury from the hardening process. So again, the goal would be Mercury is code complete. It enters into a hardening phase, and there are concrete criteria for determining when Mercury is ready to come out of hardening and be a part of a mainnet launch. That conversation is still in progress. It is a work in progress, but you're welcome to take a look at kind of where our heads are related to that in the link of the document there. Consensus. Kent has provided a lot of support to the RSpace team this week to help get RSpace into the code base. It was blocked by failing some Casper-related tests, and so there was some refactoring of that test, and now very happily, and kudos to the consensus team for supporting this. The new RSpace is now in the code base, and I'll talk a little bit more about how that's working in just a moment. Kent has also worked to migrate our use of SecP 256K1 for validator keys, and to update all the tests that get impacted by that. Work is also in progress to ensure the ability to move data from the file containing ETH addresses and rock balances provided to the Genesis block, and move that information successfully over to Rev vaults. We did postpone our discussion this week related to validator incentives at Casper. Kent is traveling, and we'll pick up this cadence next week. The slashing PR is still in review. It was in review at this time last week, and that is because all of the bullet points above this took place. So that is still a work in progress, although not much work has happened this week. We are continuing to have discussions about ways to resolve our bug 3218. It's when you fail to receive a Genesis block. And if you have joined the public testnet, you may have experienced this. I know I certainly do on a fairly regular basis. So Pavel continues to investigate this. One of the things that he's done is by modeling the Genesis protocol and the distribution of the Genesis block in TLA+, and he has some findings. We were unable to talk about that during our stand-up today, but anticipate talking about that on Friday, certainly also when Kent is available. But he is pretty excited about some of the things that he's learned. So hoping that that will help clarify what needs to be done to resolve this issue. With some sadness, we reopened 3244 yesterday. We observed the invalid repeat deploy happening on our development testnet as we were testing the new RSpace. This is not a bug that takes down a network, and it is a bug that causes problems for validators. So we observed it. We have more information based on what we saw yesterday, and have reopened this ticket with all of that information included, and Kent will be taking a look at that in the near term. And then finally, related to consensus, Kent, if you recall, we left Kent in Poland after our dev retreat. He was very generous with his time and ability to stay there, and we do believe it helped accelerate some of the work that we've experienced over the past couple of weeks with him in that time zone. And as part of his time there, Pavel and Adam helped organize him to speak at the Warsaw blockchain meetup. And so he delivered a talk on Casper there this week, and you're welcome. That link points to the YouTube video if you'd like to take a look. Many thanks to Kent for doing that, and to the team for helping to organize an opportunity to showcase RChain and the work that they're doing in their local meetup. Node. So many things are coming to Node in the release of 9.5 this week. Some of these things are behind the scene things, but some of these things are also really important to Node users. I will highlight 3161 is the ability to generate a public-private key pair via the command line. If you have previously started your node in standalone mode, watched it generate the keys, kill that node, go claim your keys, then bring up a node to join a network, you will enjoy this improvement. I know I have. And so that's a nice to have on the command line for node users. Also, similarly, I really want to call out this. We're changing the service name of show blocks. It will now be get blocks. That's just a way that if you're a node user, that's the way that you can see how many blocks your node perceives the DAG to have. And so we will be moving away from show blocks and now using get blocks. Another nice to have, it's certainly one that has presented some hiccups to node users, is that it was difficult to get the node ID, not when you bring up a node, your node goes through this process, and then it tells you what your node ID is. And it says listening at, and that's your node ID. And if you didn't catch it in that moment, it's very difficult to go find it again. The best way has been to grep logs to go find it, but now you can do that when you call. There's a call that you can use to figure out what version of node you're running, and that will now include your node ID. So that's another nice to have. And then finally, if you should choose to pass files into Node at startup and the path is invalid, your node will no longer run. It will stop right there and say, whoa, invalid path. And this will help support people trying to figure out why their node is not working. One of the reasons we find that happens is they've passed in an invalid file via an invalid path. So some node operator nice to haves there, certainly some optimizations, and I will be updating the user guide as well as the our Node 9.5 release plan to try and highlight these things that Node users need to be aware of as they start to use Node 9.5 either locally or via the testnet. So that's coming later today, hopefully. The rolling team, as I mentioned, that work is still in progress to bridge cost accounting. It is at risk for being completed this sprint. And they're focused and doing the best they can as they continue to find other blockers that make this a challenging process. We have a draft PR in related to the on-chain deployer ID. And this is kind of one of the building blocks in place for supporting the multi-sig wallet, which that work hopefully getting started next sprint as well. Also, we have Joe investigating some rolling bugs, 3395 and 3394. They had a offline conversation just after our stand-up, and he has some new ideas to move forward with that. So good news there, I hope, in terms of getting a solution in place to resolve both of these. RSpace, this one little bullet doesn't do enough justice to celebrating the work that has gone into the renovation of RSpace. Łukasz and Dom have done a tremendous amount of work to not only investigate and propose solutions to the problem that we were facing, but also to implement that work in a very quick manner, and then to bring it into the code base and get it passing all of the unit and integration tests. So tremendous kudos to our RSpace team, Dom and Łukasz, for getting this in. And let me just make sure that I'm clear what this is. So if you will recall back in March, the reason that we got to this place is that we were finding that in our development testnet, we were unable to build long chains. These are chains greater than 1,000 blocks and not very big blocks at all. And that recognized an opportunity to build these big chains likely lie in the renovation and changing and the way that our space works. So that the work that went into this made changes both in the data, the try, and the hot stores. And that's the work that's going into 9.5. What's not yet going into 9.5 is the work to optimize all of these things in new RSpace. So if you are very, very interested, do select the link to RChain 3138. You will see exactly what work is now in the code base and the work that you'll be able to utilize in 9.5. You'll also see the backlog of optimization work that needs to take place related to RSpace. And that's work that we hope to start bringing in with the next sprint. And that will continue to be a part of our work to optimize RSpace going forward. I also want to call out that one of the things that users will need to know, and I will make sure to document very clearly, and we'll talk about it a lot in our node testing tomorrow, is that there are two RSpaces now in the code base. There's the V1 and the V2. We will be launching the public testnet with V2, which will also require that any node joining the public testnet also be using V2. And you specify your choice of RSpace at the command line at when you do your run command. And there will be documentation to show you how to do this, but basically there's flag, you input V2, and all of a sudden you're using the new RSpace. And we did that because we did not want to pull out the V1 of RSpace just yet as we continue to run testing in our development testnet. And we observe that the public testnet is also an augmented space for us to continue testing. The RSpace team continues to lead the effort to investigate rolling bloat in the tuple space. This is something that we talked about at the dev retreat. Dom has spent most of this sprint doing investigation work and has documented it very, very nicely in this document here called Reduce Bloat. We talked in stand-up today about some thought exercises that are related to his analysis and some concerns about the ability for the platform to support all that we want it to support related, even in a use case scenario of just transactions. And so the team is talking about those findings and those thought exercises, and we need to continue having that conversation likely early next week, because we need to keep our turf focused on the cost accounting and bridge work for the remainder of this week. The SRE team finished the work to make sure that the performance test harness runs on every commit to the code base. That's a really nice to have for us to observe our change. We're looking for baseline measurements as well as fighting regression, and so having that as part of just our CI delivery process is really nice. In addition to our work with Whiteblock, we are also working to implement the infrastructure to support the hardening effort that I talked about earlier. This sprint contains the work of implementing Network One, which is part of the hardening effort, and then Adam continues to work with Whiteblock to implement our test scenarios in their infrastructure. And then, of course, the SRE team is never-endingly busy supporting not only the dev team in the use of CI, but also in the various networks that we maintain and operate. And so kudos to them for being able to manage their focus and flexibility when problems arise. Really grateful for their support there. Any questions about what I've offered today or other thoughts?
I just wanted to make a comment, Kelly. There shouldn't be any lack of clarity regarding the Barcelona addresses. None of the Barcelona addresses will be honored. They won't be put in escrow or anything. That was a clear instance of a scam. The addresses are marked on Etherscan. No one should be confused about that. So,
does that mean then that the tooling created to pull ROC addresses needs to be changed to not pull those addresses?
We can pull those addresses, and it's a good idea to know what the balances are associated with those addresses. They just won't be honored. They will not be. Presenting with a private key to those addresses will not get you rev.
Okay, it's the how of that statement that I'm unclear about.
Okay, well, we can work on the how together, but the requirement is very clear.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where you need to where to buy rock today on Ether Delta. Should we be assured that that's not Barcelona rock?
You should be watching that very, very carefully. Okay, so Dan has a question, which I'll get to, and then I want to touch on a few other things. Okay, so Dan's question is, can you touch on your view of the role of community as it applies to the blockchain movement as a whole? Well, I mean, in general, the idea is quite straightforward. With community, we have the technology makes it possible for communities to begin to mobilize, to begin to take effective action. That's really the whole point. With the decentralized technology, communities can begin to decide how they want to coordinate amongst themselves using notions of value, and how those notions of value map onto some kind of token structure or other economic structure that is easily built using the blockchain. And then on top of that, there's the role of the community itself in terms of the governance of that kind of technology. So in the case of RChain, at least, the idea was to tackle the governance head on, and provide a democratic structure, which we know will be imperfect to begin with and will have to evolve over time. But at least there's a structure in place that is initially democratic, and there's a democratic process to begin to modify the governance structure. So those are the base points in terms of how I see community. In terms of RChain, the more that people can get involved in the committees, such as the governance committee and the executive committee, that would be great. That's one way that people can get involved. I think it's really important for people to, kind of put their money where their mouth is, in the sense that if it's not okay to be sort of an armchair quarterback. If you want things to change, then get involved, get stuff done, help out in that way, and that's what will. That's sort of the, it's a part of effective action. So hopefully that addresses Dan's questions. So we have one sad news. Ravi has had to move on. Ravi's requirements, the compensation requirements are, they would be a third of the funding associated with the Thrust Capital deal. And on top of that, Ravi has been exposed to a lot of risk. The day he took the appointment, someone we believe we know who began making threatening phone calls. This character has made lots of threatening phone calls to lots of people in the RChain leadership. So someone made very threatening phone calls to Ravi the day he took the appointment. And since then, his exposure to risk has been considerable, culminating in 2 weeks ago. There was an attempted identity theft where there was a SIM swap on his phone. And then he had to fight to get his identity back, and those things made it so that Ravi had to move on. We'll miss Ravi and thank him very much for his service. He's been a really good and important role in the community, and we are actively working to fill the role. I have some candidates in mind, but we'll talk about that after we have a little bit more headway there. So let me stop there and check and see if there are any questions about that. Okay, all right. Looks like there's no further questions. I'll also mention that we have had several good talks with a group called RCA Capital, and we expect, so we have done all of the diligence, and we expect to get an answer on their engagement with the cooperative in the next couple of weeks. And in addition, we will be speaking with a group called Apis Capital. And looks like, I think it's on the calendar for next week. So those are two groups that have shown some significant interest in the co-op in terms of investment and engagement. At least with respect to ARCA, there will be a consideration potentially of board seats available to ARCA Capital. Which is, I've been very impressed with their diligence process, and I would welcome their engagement at the board level. Any questions on that point? Okay, very silent group today. And then, so moving on to the some other points, the member sale that was triggered by the involvement of Thrust Capital will be closing somewhere between Thursday night, Friday morning. I don't remember the exact time, but we've already allocated about half the rock that's already gone out the door, and I think there's probably another 4 million rock spoken for. So if anyone wants to get in on that, that's almost done, both in terms of the timeout on the sale and in terms of the availability of the rock allocated. So it's my obligation to make sure that everyone is aware of the status of the sale. So we brought in about around 200, and there's another 100 or so coming in the door just from the member sale. So people should just be aware of that. Okay, any questions on that point? All right. Finally, we have a question from Dan regarding publicly spreading the awareness for RChain. So we do a lot of things in terms of outreach, right? So there's the whole RCast and Casper work. Both of those are in some sense a public outreach, and that takes up a lot of time. And I don't know if people have noticed, but we're putting out a podcast once a week. A lot of people, that's all they do is put out a podcast once a week. But we're putting out a podcast once a week in addition to some pretty hefty engagement in developing the technology and keeping the company going. So that's significant. We're also doing an outreach through the exchanges. So that's another important part of what we do. When we list on the major exchanges, that will do a lot in terms of the visibility of the rev. So that's an important part of our outreach strategy. Beyond that, we are looking to craft a public outreach strategy, and that would be certainly a place where the community could get involved. That would be a most excellent opportunity for community members. I do want to say I've been very, very encouraged by the community engagement recently. I've been very impressed by what's going on in the Chinese communities, not only in terms of their clear and direct financial support, but also and there are groups that are building dApps as we speak. So I think that we should anything in this regard to have people building dApps or demonstrating the technology. That's a really good way to do community outreach. So hopefully I've answered Dan's questions. Are there any other questions for this week's community hangout? All right. No, I'm not hearing anything from anyone. Taking silence as golden, and looking forward to talking to you next week.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Ciao.